President Trump is an antagonistic, very violent speaking type of individual. If you're receiving any types of fruit, vegetables, chances are you're getting it from the undocumented, unhoused community here in California. Gavin Newsom's executive order came before Trump's, so we need to put a timeline on that. There is always a tinge of something punitive that goes on in the solution of the left wing community. They cannot do anything from an empathetic model. It has the mechanism of stripping you of autonomy, of free will, or the ability to be able to get on your feet. Once you can demonize a person, then you can criminalize them or to be able to usher in violence upon that person. What I used to hate was the volunteers would come with a camera and they'll give you some free things and you have to have a persona of gratitude or you seem to be grateful. He was so dripping with disdain and hatred.
Welcome, 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 everybody, friends, family, and fighters of all ages. This is round 3 of Seasoned Fighters, a show where we step into the ring with champions of social change so we can learn the art of fighting back. And in the blue corner, we have an activist, the host of We The Unhoused, a winner of a 2025 Webby Award and a People's Voice Award for podcast in public service and activism, and a former guest of LLAG Radio, making his return to Seasoned Fighters. Please welcome our next fighter, Theo Henderson. Theo, welcome to the show.
When you introduced me, I was thinking, man, this person seems awesome. But then you talk about me. Thank you very much for your warm words.
You are amazing, and I genuinely mean that. I mean, our conversation before was so important, and I mean, a lot has changed. We last spoke 2 years ago. I mean, this was before Trump took office, and I mean, just in 2025 alone, so many things have changed. I'm sure in your life, as well as for the unhoused community that you serve. Can you sort of give us a snapshot, like what has happened? What has it been like?
Well, to give a little history on how We The Unhoused came to be, I created this show when I was living out on the streets myself. I had been unhoused for over 8 years. And at the time, I was trying to find a way to become housed, but also a way to gather insight and educate people on the realities of being unhoused. At the time, there was very few and far between kind of reasoned or educated kind of conversational pieces about houselessness. It was, and we're going to talk about this a little later on about the language and the imagery that was posed when being unhoused and stereotypes that still persist perniciously. But most importantly, I felt it was necessary for we to get at uh, an optimal moment to talk about it and to educate people who wanted to really genuinely understand and to make those intersections and connections. Thus, We The Unhoused was born. I started interviewing my friends on the street. Then it got to a point when I started going to other communities in Los Angeles. Listeners that were unhoused in other areas lamented on the fact that there was no place for them to talk about, tell their stories. And it gave me larger inspiration to keep the show going and going to other areas in California. I've been in Washington. I've been to other areas that've been New Mexico, other places to communicate the challenges that has been going on with the unhoused community. I'm currently partnering with taking We The Unhoused to a different and international level. I started to interview unhoused and formerly unhoused international people from Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, because they're listening to the show and have requested to be on to talk about their stories. So there is definitely a need for it. And with iHeart, they have been so great in the partnership in making sure that the stories get out there, but also trying to connect together about the realities of being unhoused and displaced, but also the intersections that seem to follow us everywhere as a human being.
Now, going back on Trump specifically, back in July of this year, he signed an executive order titled Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Streets. This is just further criminalizing the unhoused, further criminalizing mental illness. For those of the folks listening who don't really understand the gravity of this, can you sort of paint a picture? Like, how does this change the already terrible conditions that we've put the unhoused in?
Well, we need to start that. And I was a former educator, so I want to tell shades of meaning and the language arts lexicon. We talk about shades of meaning and how they make an impact consciously or unconsciously. So we by now know that President Trump is an antagonistic, very violent speaking type of individual. And in his belief system, it this constellation of beliefs has been punitive measures against vulnerable, marginalized people. So to that end, when he speaks about unhoused people, gathering what I learned being on the streets from people that look at unhoused people through the lens of a most negative or more predatory or violent type of narrative, it makes the leaps, the conclusions that he embodies with the language. If you read his executive order, he basically outlines or delineates what he feels unhoused people are. They're either substance addicted or mentally ill, or both. And he literally, I literally quoted what he stated in that executive order. So in essence, he says the majority of the unhoused community members, notwithstanding people fleeing domestic abuse, notwithstanding the veterans that are unhoused, notwithstanding the rising elderly population of unhoused, notwithstanding children that are in foster care that are unhoused, notwithstanding now the unhoused undocumented that are being targeted, they are all mentally ill or on substance addicted or substance abuse, and they require to be forcibly or involuntarily in shelters, or they need to go to jail. And we are living in a time where inflation is off the roof, rents is high, food prices are high, and for no fault of their own, if you do not do or do not follow those lines of, I guess, relief that he believes they are, then you are seen as a pariah or a denizen of the society. If you listen to some of the press conference conversations, he makes disparaging remarks about unhoused people when he's driving from the White House. We see tents all over the place. Well, yeah, it's not the Ritz, and we have a wealth gap issue. We have inequality, and we have not addressed that where people can have a dignified living and a dignified existence. And until we do address that, instead of making it like it's us versus them, they need to be in jail or off with their heads or putting into some kind of detention or concentration camp, then we're going to continue to see these things. Punitive measures do not work, but we will delve a little bit more into that conversation with some of the punitive measures that are going all across this country.
An added component that makes the current hunting of unhoused people um, really difficult is the current war on immigration. Since Trump took office, he's always been anti-immigrant, but it's like it's been ratcheted up times 50. Um, and so, what has it been like from your experience and the people that you've helped out and spoken to, experiencing this war of being unhoused and undocumented?
And I don't want to give short shrift to the house undocumented that are being targeted too, but I want to take some time to highlight some differences I mentioned earlier. When I went to start to investigate, because when I first started We The Unhoused, I went out to investigate and talk with some of the farm workers, because there's a lot of agricultural communities out here in California. There's farms, there's other places, plants and things like that. But most specifically, if you're receiving any types of fruit, vegetables, or go to Starbucks or go to any restaurants like what's the Whole Greens or whatever store that you go in and get produce from, chances are you're getting it from the undocumented, unhoused community here in California, because most of the bulk of the type of vegetables and fruits come from this area. So to paint a deeper picture to the matter is that when you go out there, I mentioned one of the difficulties of being unhoused and working, but to be unhoused and working and undocumented poses new different type of challenges. For instance, how those undocumented people may have a support system to be able to find out what's going to become of the person if they become targeted. They have know your rights kind of literature. They are in a connected deep network. They can have people looking, patrolling around the neighborhood, and so on and so forth. Conversely, where you have undocumented people who are on the farm and the plantation, that is not always the case because the network is a little bit fragmented. You don't have your passport on. Most unhoused people don't carry a passport or birth certificate, and IDs is easily lost when you're swept all the time. And if you wasn't necessarily undocumented, but if you're unhoused, you are known, and particularly in Los Angeles or in California areas, that you are swept sometimes with no notice at all, and you can lose everything. And when you are being swept and things are being thrown away, so what it makes it easier, it makes it more easier to target someone that's undocumented and unhoused, because there's no one that's going to be able to look deeper or fight for this undocumented unhoused person, because our society is already set up that we don't look at unhoused people truly in the humanistic form that they are. And therein, when we do that, it's easier to prey upon and traffic, let's be honest, these vulnerable people and send them to the most far-flung places. And let's not say that Trump's administration doesn't do that. We know what they tried to do with the Guatemalan children in the dead of night, where they were trying to rush and spirit them away or traffic them. And there was no recourse, or there was no lawyer. If there wasn't a lawyer there to speak and stop it, put an injunction on, there's not that same kind of necessary scrutiny at this time to be able to do that for some undocumented unhoused person. But if you're housed, you have a little bit more of a fighting chance because you have a support system, you have a lawyer, or you have someone that's on the case. Let's look back a few years ago. I did an episode on the El Monte elderly unhoused community, and I was talking about the hardships that were going on and how the law enforcement in the middle of the night was let loose on the elderly and unhoused community. It got to the point where unhoused people were hiding deeper into the woods because they were being hunted. And I want you to turn your attention to the same kind of intensity and understanding that they could be hunting down unhoused, undocumented people, and there is barely going to be a peep about it because be unhoused is difficult anyway. But to be unhoused in such a tenuous or tenuous type of environment where you don't have the necessary skills to fight back, if you wanted to, it makes it much more difficult.
One of the things that a lot of people have the difficulty reconciling with is the fact that ideologically we often associate antagonism towards unhoused people as a conservative thing. Conservatives do that. We love the unhoused, but yet people forget that a lot of Democrats and neoliberals love to dehumanize the unhoused. And I want to start with Gavin Newsom's executive order cracking down on encampments. What's been the effect of this executive order? And can you explain how these do-gooders on the left who associate with Democrats, how they pretend to care about unhoused people, but they actually end up doing more harm?
That's an excellent point, because I think we need to understand, and incidentally, Gavin Newsom's executive order came before Trump's, so we need to put a timeline on that. But also to understand that they have a bipartisan agreement about unhoused people. When you have a collective idea of unhoused people as mentally ill or substance users or have the nefarious stereotype, it's very difficult to do away with it. Where the do-gooders believe their solutions is humane, but really it's punitive, and they want to duck the inhumane portions of it. Like there's many politicians like Gavin and them, when they're approached with, well, the solution is dignified housing, they'll come up with every reason along the world with trying to seem like that they're compassionate, but the end result is still punitive, or they create solutions like Karen Bass does. Is like what she calls it inside safe, but many of the people that have lived in those programs call it inside starving. There is a wholesale of issues that are going on where the abuse of the staff, the lack of food, the jail-like conditions where they don't have guests coming over, they have to be in a curfew. All of these type of punitive measures that you're talking about, able-bodied individuals that we would not sit still for, they have to endure that because they have the moniker of being unhoused. Then they also manipulate their treatment by using certain language. They'll co-opt um, therapeutic language, or they'll co-opt activist type of language, but have the end result of a punitive outcome. For example, like trauma-informed care. What they're meaning with trauma-informed care is with a cop with a gun, and they have the social worker at the side, and they'll have the social worker asking clinical questions, but the cop is waiting to step into the wings. Or they'll use punitive measures like, well, what we got 4118. It's the law. It's not. Sorry, it's just we're just doing our job. So they'll create these circumstances like Karen Bass does here. They'll come and take the area of the unhoused person. They'll tell them that they only can have 2 bags, and then once they agree to inside starving, they'll put fences or use hostile architecture to reinforce and to commit themselves. It's like they have cleaned up the area. The second thing that they target, where a community here in particular, is the recreational vehicles. They are running out because cities and neighborhoods have been clamping down on it because of the housing crisis, and many people are using RVs to avoid themselves from being out on the street. They have started to ban them. They can't be in certain places at certain hours, or they can be only a certain day, or they will just eliminate the complete area. So it creates a bottleneck of unhoused people wherever you go. They're not going to just disappear once you just paint red paint on the sidewalk or put fences there. They're still going to be unhoused, and you're creating a system where they have nowhere to go, and the solutions that you have are not that sustainable anyway.
And staying on that subject of these proposed solutions, I think we really need to talk about RFK Jr. He made a documentary not too long ago where he depicted unhoused people as, it was this very sensationalized documentary about this open air drug bazaar, really highlighting the state of unhoused people. And then his solution is this idea of a wellness farm, which is basically a labor camp disguised as a mental health support system or a rehab program. So what is your reaction to RFK Jr. and just these really dystopian, quote, solutions that are being cooked up?
Well, the difficulties where they have, like, particularly like this Democrat, this delusional Democrat, conversely, then the Republicans or the right wings, the Republican right wings don't disguise their disdain. They don't like unhoused people. They just think they're just the detritus of society, and that's just the long and short of it. Where the difficulty of someone like RFK is he in his delusional mind believes he knows better in a condescending or patronizing way. These wellness farms, which I wanted to talk about, is on akin to what we would do with inside starving. There is always a tinge of something punitive that goes on, and the solution of, I want to say, the leftist or the left wing community. They cannot do anything from an empathetic model. They have to have some kind of jail term, or you're going to be forced to do something, or it has the mechanism of stripping you of autonomy, of free will, or the ability to be able to get on your feet. And those are the 3 things that are very important to understand when you hear the leftist models, is because you'll listen to it as a period of time that there's something punitive going on here. They're couching it in words of trauma-informed care or wellness models, or they'll use the language of the activists to further their punitive aims, and they'll be able to duck the monikers or the labels of being heartless or cruel, and that cruelty is the point, but they have to dress it up so they don't look like they're just these buttholes that are doing messed up things to vulnerable people.
Now, I want to go ahead and play a quick game of word association, but the version specifically for alternate solutions that are proposed for unhoused people. So I'll name some different ideas and solutions that have been thrown out, and just give me your immediate reaction to these. All right, so starting off with number one, building more shelters.
That is that's a leftist example. Though the right wing has been trying to adopt it, but it's a left, and there's several problems with that. Most unhoused people, the majority of unhoused people, do not want to go in the shelter. They want housing, dignified housing. With the beginning and the end of their problem, they don't have to go through any curfew. They don't have to fill out any paperwork. They don't have to go through the headaches of dealing with uh, their condition on a regular, constant basis. Where, for example, the Inside Starving is a program that, Karen Bass believes that they shouldn't be on the street. Okay, everyone agrees with that. But what they don't want to do is to be put on a merry-go-round of services that at a certain point it expires. They've lost everything. They got to start all over. They got to go to another program until they're in this big circle jerk of programs that are offering no tangible solutions in sight. So that is why I always abhorred shelters. I've always abhorred shelters anyway. But it's been pernicious thing that to disabuse with my own friends of this model of then just going to shelter. At least you got somewhere to be. Like it's more of a problem than you really realize, and you have to really be vigilant. But you also have to take the time to pull back the weeds to see what the root of the problem is.
All right, next one, affordable housing expansion.
That is a deceptive moniker because affordable to who? Because they don't use the models that are in, I would say, in reality. They use the still, even their version of affordable is still not affordable to very, very targeted, vulnerable communities. So we have to look at that and explore that. Are we talking about where people can be able to afford with a livable wage? And we're not even commiserate to that in this reality. So it has to be able to be in tandem with livable wages, dignified housing, and in order for it to be a viable and realistic solution. These terms, this is what I mean when the leftists use adapt terms or hijack terms in order to obfuscate people that are not very well educated into the mysteries of what is going on with unhoused community members.
All right, next one, rent assistance.
That is also a deceptive one. I recently am in an SRO, and I am in a financial bind myself, and I'm waiting for some of the funding to come together. And I had reached out to a couple of these programs, and these programs are what do you call it, limits or uh, guidelines, but they are not always addressing the true nature of stopping people to not become on the streets. It needs to be explored a little bit more deeper. The one program that I reached out to, they have a spending limit or rent assistance limit of a one time only of $1,000. And we live in California. I mean, come on, California is a higher expensive place to live in, to be sure, but no one's going to be able to survive just one time only with $1,000, and the rent is consistently where I'm at. It's not affordable. It's like you know what? I get a bottle of this water and throw it in the ocean, thinking that's going to solve the problem, and that's just that's these type of one shot wonders or half measures are what frustrates most of the unhoused community.
All right, next one, more funding for mental health and addiction services.
If you listen to people like Gavin Newsom, if you listen to people like Karen Bass, if you listen to people like Donald Trump, you would think that the majority of all of the unhoused community members, if, will you walk away with, they are mentally ill or they're on substances. And that has been the most difficult stereotype to dismantle because it's a small slice of community members. And many people that have become on substance usage usually do so when they become unhoused because be unhoused is very difficult. It is not easy. And most of the proponents or most of the people that talk about unhoused people would not last for a week. They wouldn't even last a day because there's so much that goes on, so much of a sensory overload, so much of a climatic overload of you to be able to, rationalize and to be able to become functioning and to deal with your own emotions emotionally as well as physically, dealing with, the climates and how do you navigate moving about to try to get out of being unhoused, as well as trying to stay in the present. Like, for example, one of the things that I was noticing when I was unhoused is that you're constantly fighting, battling between the present and the future, and you can't. And it's very the present. You have to stay several steps ahead to make sure that you stay alive, but also keeping your sanity, but also keeping the functioning of yourself in order for you to meet the future. You have to, for example, if you have health issues, you have to navigate how to live on the street and be able to stay healthy so you don't collapse or have a heat stroke or whatever in order for the future to try to get housing or to navigate the programs and the day requirements like the recent cutting of EBT or the forcing people that are on the street to have at least 80 hours of job hunting and things like that. These kind of ridiculous type of things that are not realistic, but it to people that are not delved or first into the realities of being unhoused, it makes all of the sense because people don't want to work, they want to stay out there on the drugs, they are mentally ill, and all of these stereotypes to avoid the realities of the issues. Sustainable housing, dignified housing, livable wage, and a healthcare system that is not punitive, like it's a privilege for you to have healthcare, or it make you the label of you being a communist or a socialist because you dare to be treated like a human being, where other places in the world doesn't look at it like that. You get the standard basis of care like we all should have.
All right, next one, universal basic income.
Wow, that would just that's the perfect. This dovetails nicely. Where I universal income is the conversation that I'm really thinking again, in order for us to approach houselessness head on. Earlier, we talked about 2 years ago, you and I were talking about the unhoused community and the crisis that go on. At the time, I used to say 5 unhoused people die a day. It's now 7 unhoused people die a day. And part of the reason is we have a lot of working unhoused people that are still unhoused and still are not able to afford dignified housing. And these monikers, these little statements that are being trotted out here by blue and red politicians are not meeting the moment. It's missing the moment in the gargantuan types of ways. So universal income is a conversation that really needs to be explored, but most importantly, it should not be hijacked again by the blue to, I want to say poison the conversation and to create, because there's also, and I wanted to just came into my mind, there's also this kind of growing resentment that I hear from community members. They're getting free stuff. They're getting handouts. It's always something derisive about the conversation. Why you won't have the empathy? To me, it's just a justification for people to be unempathetic to people that are suffering, that they don't understand the story. It makes them feel a little bit more superior, a little bit more better than themselves, without them having to draw attention that they want to feel better or step on someone that's in a vulnerable state and look and wag their fingers at. So,
All right, and then my last one here, tiny home villages.
we in the unhoused community call them tiny sheds, and that what is not communicated well. But this is a clear example. When I said earlier of how the left and the blue love to create this imagery that they are helping and meeting the moment, but it has that, again, that tinge of punitive. It has a punitive thing to it. It has something to justify their unempathetic side, and bolster their superiority complex. Many tiny sheds have inadequate uh, temperature or climate control kind of conditions. They break down easily. The staff is outright abhorrent to the residents. You're not allowed to have the same type of relaxed type of community that if you were in a house environment, you could have. For example, if you have a person that you are partnered with and you want to have them to come over, you guys have a date night, whatever, that can't happen there, because it's always painted in the most sinister of lights. That you're trying to do a flop house, or it's a drug den, or or you're just willy nilly, and so it's created that punitive conversation. It's created that negative undercurrent that most people that live in those tiny sheds, usually once they find out they're skinny on the reality of what's going on, it becomes untenable. And many of them leave tiny sheds to go back on the street because they feel safer.
Now, transitioning over to media and media figures, I think one of the most mask off evil moments that we've seen, at least this year, happened when Fox News host Brian Kilmeade suggested lethally injecting the unhoused as a solution. People have gotten fired for not showing any sympathy for Charlie Kirk, and yet this guy said that he wants to exterminate the unhoused, and he still has a job. And so, days later, there was a mass shooting at a homeless encampment in Minneapolis. So, can you give us your thoughts on just the increasing violence, both in rhetoric, in mainstream, and then also the real physical violence that is happening?
This is one of the earlier linchpin parts of the conversation that I wanted to point out. Prior to that, there was a Lancaster, and this is a Democratic mayor, Lancaster mayor, that said that in order for him to get rid of all of the unhoused or the bad unhoused in his community, he wants to feed all of them, kill them off with fentanyl. And this language, this undercurrent, this violent language, that I do believe that there is some contribution from people like President Trump, and I do believe people like Charlie Kirk, that there is no such thing. And I want to just take a quick detour and talk about Charlie Kirk and why people like me, an African American man, that takes exception to when I hear false or hypocritical blaming or people celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. To be clear, he detested people of color. He detested Black people, and you cannot. And I believe James Baldwin said something to the effect of this, and I'm going to paraphrase. We can have a difference of opinion, but if it's where the removal or extinction of my people, that's not a political difference of opinion. It's not a both sides issue. It is where Charlie Kirk was speaking the language of hate and violence. And therein, when you speak the language of hate and violence, you invite or usher in people that hear that message and believe that they can take it to a step further. For example, when you have people, elected leaders or a podcaster like Charlie Kirk, that has had a platform for years demonizing people. Once you can demonize a person, then you can criminalize them or to be able to usher in violence upon that person. So when you have someone like a mayor talking about killing off all the unhoused people with fentanyl, then you have people that are in platforms that have a lot of listeners that are listening from all walks of life, but also that have gravitated through that wavelength, that frequency that you're posing out there of hate language, of violent language, or you're leaving it up to them to make that decision for themselves. You create and intensify that world. We witnessed that when he mentions about killing off all the unhoused people, and then the very next day that you have over 12 unhoused people targeted and harmed, who listened to what he said and says, I'm going to take them up on it? I know from my own personal experience, I have witnessed and have had violent encounters being unhoused because people have been inspired by people that detest unhoused people and fed that, and they walk away after feeding that kind of frenzy with people that don't like people in the community, and they do violent things. I don't know if you've seen recently where there was an unhoused person that walked into, I believe it was here in Los Angeles, Taco Bell. A security officer just turned around and slugged her. There was the time where the unhoused people there in Los Angeles that were setting fires to unhoused people. They were running up on going to unhoused encampments and stabbing them. And so this language, when you are able to demonize and create that environment, it makes it very easy to do these things, but it also makes it justifiable to people in their warped viewpoints about unhoused people. When you can dehumanize a human being, then you can criminalize them and you can engage in violent activity. And they feel there's no repercussion to that.
I mean, you've been in this space for such a long time and been an advocate for unhoused communities. So you're no stranger to hearing these words, whether it is in the comment sections of the content that you post or in person. And I mean, we've seen over the last 5, 10 years the expansion of media and content about antagonizing unhoused people,
Yes.
making viral videos, doing these walkthroughs in Skid Row,
Hmm.
in the Tenderloin.
Yeah.
These people who are really sensationalizing. I mean, the same way that RFK did.
Hmm.
How do you feel seeing this growth in anti-homeless culture, content, really an economy that is brewing out of this, especially as you contrast that with the violence that's being amplified towards them?
I've noticed which caused me to want to do something. When I was mentioned when I was on the street, I noticed that, and because before I created We The Unhoused, there were aggressive people coming up to me with a mic and trying to engage with me, spewing out, erroneous or fallacious type of statements to get a rise. Or when I was at my most vulnerable and I got swept, and had people, news crew trying to come down when you're at your most lowest ebb to demonize you, or ones what I used to hate, where the volunteers would come with a camera and they'll give you some free things and they want to put you on while you're accepting it, and you have to have a persona of gratitude, or you seem to be grateful, or if you don't, then you like being like one of the when I first started doing my episodes, I showed when I was going to be swept and how hostile the staff was to me. Well, he said he doesn't want any help. This is why he gets treated the way he gets. Or when I started see the normalcy of law enforcement, when I did the episode where at the El Monte elderly unhoused community members, when it's 100 and something degrees and they're sitting in an air conditioned car and they're getting upset that the unhoused elderly are not moving like they're Olympic track stars down most arduous type of environments. And I recorded just the language, the way they had, it was so dripping with disdain and hatred. And it seems to be more and more normalized among law enforcement. We had a mayor talking about killing unhoused people with fentanyl. We got, Gavin Newsom with his slick comments and the way he's making it sound like, well, you'd have no more excuses. You can, if you either clear out encampment resolution funds. If you don't do that, then you're going to lose money, or threatening cities in the respect that if they don't become much more punitive or carceral against unhoused people, then they're going to lose essential funds to their cities. So there's this growing bipartisan disdain that they have of unhoused people, and it's growing and it's being normalized.
Wow. I mean, I'm so grateful to have you on the show because, I mean, I think there's, like you had mentioned before, there's so many nuances just to, existing and being unhoused, trying to make sure that you're taking care of your health needs, having enough water and space to cool yourself down, especially as these temperatures have been rising.
Exactly.
And so, my last question really is about addressing the root core issues regarding the unhoused. If you were appointed as sort of the minister of unhoused, responsible for setting up programs, allocating funds, designing solutions. I mean, I know that that's such a wild position, but what would be the top priority things you think that we would need to stop this from being a problem, to stop this train, to make uh, dignified solutions for the unhoused community?
I think I've been wrestling with that question in so many areas, but I think the first thing that needs to be tackled in order for it to the programs to be set in place and to be accepted by society. I do think it needs to be a stronger push on educating people what houselessness means and what the forms of houselessness. For some people, people think unhousing is street houselessness. There's so many forms of house insecurity, but houselessness in ways that you don't understand. The person that's fixing your stuff at Starbucks, one of the persons that I interviewed, she was unhoused, but she worked Starbucks. And like I said, you can go to any store from Ralph's, Whole Foods, or whatever, and you might want to get up a basket of oranges, a watermelon, or whatever it is that's in season, and that's been picked by an unhoused, a documented person. Um, the list goes on. You go to the restaurants, they're undocumented, unhoused, or they're undocumented people, and to understand that how we are so on the precipice of being unhoused or displaced because the rents are going up, dignified wages or livable wages are seems like out of our grasp. We need to have a breakdown of class to understand that we are blaming the wrong people. We're punitive against the wrong people. People are trying to survive in myriads of ways. When I mentioned earlier, when I was unhoused, that you have to contend with the present and the future. And one of the things I omitted and I didn't think about was the LA fires and the unhoused people that were affected by the LA fires. The person that's damaged by climate change or affected by climate change are unhoused people. They have to ingest all types of toxic things. They have to ingest the winds and rains of heaven. They have to the miracle nature of our climate change. We have heat waves we have to contend with. We have to deal with the health issues of when it gets colder, because most people that are dying of hypothermia is not in places like Chicago and other colder climes. It's here in California, it's Los Angeles, because we don't have adequate places for unhoused people to be to warm themselves up, or we do it so begrudgingly. That's another thing I've been on the city about when the weather is getting so untenable, or it's difficult for me to breathe, and I know the climate index it bothers me. Think about other unhoused people, and when I have to take to task the city, where are the cooling centers? Why are there not any transportation vans taking unhoused people to cooling centers, or finding or taking time to make sure that they are hydrated and they're cooling? And so I can go on and on, but I think we get the gist of what I think what we need. We need a strong education conversation, and then we can work on a pyramid of dignified housing, food insecurity being addressed, as well as supportive resources to make sure that we sustain that they can stay into it. And that doesn't mean a one-time shot only $1,000 kind of cap to for rent explosions. And we know we have a problem. That's not addressing the problem. That's only a band-aid on a broken leg. So
Theo, I've had a blast chatting with you today. Honestly, the conversation went by a little too fast,
yeah,
but I know that we've all learned so much just from you sharing your experiences. and you're always welcome back. I know that as more chaos happens in this administration, I mean, it's not even year one, so I know we were going to need your voice back again to make sense of all this. But before we head out, can you please tell the folks who are watching at home, what are you working on these days? Where can we find you, and how can we support you?
Work now currently, I have been on a stay on the moment type of campaign because of so much craziness is going on in the world. So I've been doing We The Unhoused every other Tuesday. My episode just dropped today, my current one, where we deal with, there's a celebration that's coming out this Saturday in South LA where they're dealing with food justice, which is, to give a plug out there, the Crenshaw is a full event. They have a swap meet. There's going to have speakers. They're going to have music. There's going to be a dancing marching band, all of the accoutrements that are necessary to connect the community and feed the need, as well as having equitable and financially feasible type of solutions that you can get for fruit, vegetables, other things that they're going to have vendors there as well. Most importantly, you can find me on Instagram. I am at We The Unhoused on Instagram. If you have a story or you have community members that you feel that are instrumental in helping the unhoused community, reach out to me at wetheunhoused@gmail.com. Or like I said, that's where I usually am going to be.
Awesome. All right, everybody, that is the final bell. Thanks for being in our corner. Don't forget to follow Theo and listen to We The Unhoused all over social media. And we'll see you another round. Peace.